feel like you're the only one working on this relationship? What happens when you're the one committing and the other person just isn't? Hi, and welcome back to Ask Dr. Saira, the show where I answer your questions about relationships, personal growth, and mental health. Today's question comes from Sarah. And Sarah says, what if I am always the one committing and the other person is not? I read relationship books, I go to counseling, but he is just not interested. Okay, so the question is, what if I am always the one committing and the other person is not? Right? So this Sarah is the one who's going for counseling. She's reading relationship books and her partner just isn't doing any of that. And so her question is, what if I'm the only one committing? Now, this is not a new story. I hear this story probably every twice or three times a week from clients, that I'm the only one in this relationship that seems to be concerned about it. The other person just floating along, coming along for the ride and not doing any work. So one of the things to be aware of is that and we're talking here about romantic relationship, right? So intimate partnership. But it could be true for friendships, I suppose, but let's focus for today on intimate partnerships. So what often happens that I've noticed that happens in intimate partnerships is that there's often one person who's kind of the emotional leader in the relationship, right? So there's one person in the relationship who's more aware of emotions, who's more aware of the need for social interaction, who's more aware of just the impact, right? The impact of different things on the relationship. And often the other person's just not, right? Just not as tuned in to the relationship dynamics. And this can feel very frustrating because if you're the one who's tuned into the relationship dynamics, it's like you feel like you're constantly rowing this boat, right? Like you're rowing and rowing and rowing and you're doing all this effort and the other person just sitting in the boat, like going along for the ride. And it's like, why aren't you working harder? I could really use your help, right? But what I would encourage you to consider is that perhaps, Sarah, your gift is being that emotional leader in the relationship, right? Your gift to the relationship is being the monitor, being the one with the stronger biceps that's going to row the boat. Now, that's not to say your partner should just get away with floating along, but one of the things that I know from the research is that couples often come to counseling about 6 years after the problem started, like the serious problem started. 6 years later, that's when they finally come to couples counseling, and by that time is often, it's the last ditch attempt to save this thing. And so it often, I don't know what the stats are on that, but in my experience with, and that's why I don't do couples sessions anymore because it's just too painful. They all break up and I can't handle it. So I just can't do it. Though I know some great couples therapists, so send me an email if you need some referrals for some good couples therapists. I would say that, is there an opportunity or a need here for some outside support? Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be couples counseling. It could be just someone who really loves you both, who you can just bounce the relationship off. I know for my sister and her wife, when they're going through stuff, they often ask me to just I don't really mediate. I just kind of listen to both sides and then translate, more like a translator than a mediator, right? And they just, because they're not hearing each other. And so they need a third person there to help them hear each other. And I'm happy to do that because I'm really invested in their relationship. And so if you're looking for a translator mediator, make sure someone who is really either really invested in your relationship or totally neutral, objective stranger, right? Don't pick someone who's on your side or on their side because that'll skew the table, right? So that's another idea is you might want to bring in a third person and to have this conversation about, I feel like I'm rowing the boat here and you're just along for the ride. And I pack the lunch and, and I pick the route and I la 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 la. So it could be that you're just the person in the relationship to be more emotionally gifted. Another thing to think about is, how do you measure commitment, right? So the way that you're measuring commitment may be, going to therapy or reading books. That's how you're measuring commitment. Their way of measuring commitment may be something completely different. Their way of measuring commitment might be, well, I chose to be monogamous with you and I'm not sleeping with anybody else, and that shows my commitment. Or their mindset might be, we've built a house together, we built a home together, and I'm doing my part to pay into the mortgage, and that's demonstrating my commitment, right? So the way that they show commitment might be very different than the way that you show commitment. And so just start getting curious about, what are some of the ways that my partner is actually demonstrating their commitment to me? And it may be little things. It may be that you get to choose the movie that you're going to watch on the Friday night Netflix binge, right? It might be simple as they're making you meals without being asked, right? It could all sorts of different things that we do for each other to demonstrate our commitment. This is the point I'd also like to introduce, if you haven't already heard of it, this idea of love languages, right? So there's this idea that there's these 5 love languages, and they are gift giving. So that's where somebody likes to buy things for other people. Words of affirmation. So those are the people who love like writing the love letters and saying, I love you. There's quality time. So those are the people who just want to be around you, not, just with your presence and your undivided attention. There is acts of service. So those are the people who will do things for you to make your life easier, that are not asked for. They're just doing it to kind of take stuff off your plate. And then finally, there's physical touch. So, the hugs and the kisses and the holding and the cuddling and all of that. So the way that you're demonstrating your commitment might be through one of those languages, and your partner isn't actually speaking the same language. They're speaking a different language. And so if you were to get curious about which of these love languages each of us has, then you'll understand when they're showing you commitment. The fact that they're still in the relationship means there's a commitment, right? There's some level of commitment. Now, if it feels like you're doing all the heavy lifting all the time and you're getting resentful about that, right? Then that's something to look at as well, as to where does this pattern also show up, and does this pattern show up in other areas of my life? Is this just something I do where I take on the lion's share of the emotional well-being of relationships? Did I do that with my siblings? Did I do that with my parents? Did I do that at school? Like, just get curious about what part you have to play in that dynamic, right? Because we cannot change other people. By now we know this, but we can change our part in a relationship. And as you change your part in the relationship, the other person is going to change because you're connected to each other, right? And so maybe taking a step back and saying, like, this investment in the relationship, what's that about? And kind of taking it from that perspective. So those are some ideas of how you might kind of rework this question about commitment in the relationship, and just kind of get curious about what else might be going on here from a different lens. So hopefully that was helpful. I will see you next time. Bye.